Hello and welcome to the Weekly Defense Podcast, this week brought to you in partnership with our sponsor FNSS. And I'm your host, Noemi Di Stefano, coming to you this week from DSEI in London, where I'm joined by the rest of the team, some old and some new voices, to bring you all the news from the show floor. So let's welcome them. Let's start from Samuel Beale, Shephard's regular contributor. Samuel, hello and welcome to the Weekly Defense Podcast.
Hi, Noemi.
So how are you feeling the first time on the podcast? Are you
I'm a
excited?
little nervous. It's my first time on the podcast.
No, don't be. It's going to be fine. And we are really happy to have you here. Harry, our senior naval reporter. Hi.
Hi, Noemi. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Military training editor Trevor Nash. Welcome back, Trevor.
Thank you, Naomi. Pleasure to be here.
And on the air desk, air editor Tim Martin. Hi, Tim.
Hi, Noemi. Good to be back.
Hello, everyone. So a lot of excitement around. I'm certainly excited about being here at the first show of my life. And I'm also excited about recording the podcast here in person with you all after 2 years. So on the show this week, we will bring you the top headlines from DSEI 2021. In the second part of the show, we speak to the director of UK Defence and Security Exports to look at the future of Britain's export market in a post-Brexit and post-COVID age. And our sponsor provides this week Industry Voice segment. Let's get things kicked off. It's the first big trade show since the Integrated Review was released, and also the industrial strategy, and the first event that we have attended in person. Now, Trevor, last week you said that at DSEI 2021 you were going to look for some answers, and you were going to try and find out how some of the things mentioned in Integrated Review are going to be reflected on the show. So did you find some of these answers you were looking for?
Yes and no. I should be in politics, shouldn't I? It's a very interesting show for me because obviously the main thrust is not training and simulation, but there are a good sort of 50 companies there that are involved in that sphere. One of the big things at the moment is the UK's requirement for a single synthetic environment. And Improbable Defence briefed me on what they've developed so far, and it is very interesting. And of course, as you'll see from our website, a news item that I wrote a couple of days ago, CAE have also got a similar system called Counterpart. And this single synthetic environment is looking at the way that militaries can train in the future, but perhaps more importantly, how they can undertake decision-making skills and mission rehearsal tasks. And it's very interesting going to talk to other companies, how many of them discussed the whole question of single synthetic environments. So it's going to play a very large part in the future. So that was Improbable and CAE. Kinetic, Kinetic have got a massive resource of training and simulation, but it's spread throughout the company. They are now looking at trying to bring it together more under one umbrella to maximise their capabilities. And one of the things that they're looking very closely at the moment is the Navy's Defence Operational Training Capability, brackets M for maritime. And they're pursuing that contract with some vigour at the moment.
So when is that capability going to be ready?
It's being done in phases. Phase 1, which includes the Maritime Command and Staff Trainer, that is going to be probably awarded next year. So that is still being evaluated by the MOD at the moment.
And I just wanted to go back 1 second to your story about CAE exhibiting the Counterpart single synthetic environment at DSEI. You mentioned in your story that is going to be demonstrated next year?
The UK's requirement through Strategic Command, that's gone in 2 phases, and it's coming towards the end of phase 2 at the moment. So Improbable have done a great deal of work on that. It's still ongoing, and then we don't know what Strategic Command are going to do at the end of that second phase. Okay. There might be a third phase, or they might decide to can it, or they might decide to move on with more contracts.
Okay, thank you, Trevor. Let's move to the air desk. So, Tim, earlier this week, on Tuesday, on the first day of the show, we were looking at what we thought would have been the big headlines from the air domain. We were looking at a new medium helicopter requirement announcement. So, tell us more about the headlines.
Yeah, certainly the new medium helicopter requirements was one big item we thought might be released or announced by the RAF at the show. That hasn't happened for whatever reason. There's no official line on when it'll happen. It was just, I think, trade media journalists talking that potentially this would be a really good opportunity for the RAF to do that.
Are you surprised that it wasn't announced?
No, surprised by the delay slightly, yes, because clearly in terms of giving industry the opportunity to offer and put forward bids and make sure that there's first deliveries in 2025, which is kind of the out of service date for Puma, then yes, that's clearly it needs to happen sooner rather than later. Because if it doesn't, then there's a capability gap then for the UK. That's probably the big picture and the headline. So even without that, the industry news has dominated in terms of new medium helicopters, so DSEI. So you are seeing big back and forth and the competition heating up between Airbus with the H175M and Leonardo with the AW149. So the 149 is here. A full-scale aircraft, and then there's a little model on display on top of a plinth, the H175M, and then also Airbus have mentioned that they would offer the UK production from their Broughton facility in Wales, which is really interesting because that effectively makes Airbus a second onshore rotorcraft manufacturer for the UK, which is brilliant competition really for Yeovil and Leonardo. So I think it'll really push things or make it interesting insofar as there'll be a big decision to make for the UK. On top of that, of course, those two companies aren't the only ones in play. You have the S-70I, Lockheed Martin will offer that from their Poland facility. Whether they have a concrete plan then to maybe change things up and offer a surprise by going with some UK production, it's unknown at this stage. Certainly Lockheed Martin haven't come forward and mentioned that, so there could be more twists and turns ahead. But clearly, returning to the big picture, industry needs requirements ASAP.
Okay, and one of your other stories was about next generation rotorcraft capability. And so what's the news in that?
So more or less on that one is that NATO have admitted that a future vertical lift solution could be NATO's next generation rotorcraft capability, the new medium helicopter. Now, that won't happen until 2035, 2040. So there's a long way to go. They're only in a pre-concept phase at this point, but there's a meeting next week in Luxembourg where NATO will, for the first time, have an industry day where the big manufacturers, airframers, including you would assume Airbus and Leonardo, will be there, but also some of the suppliers, and it's an opportunity then for NATO to have a discussion with industry and talk to them about what could potentially be on the table in terms of vertical lift designs, and we're looking at the NH90 and that entire all those from Europe who have fleets with NH90, it's close to about 450 aircraft you're talking about will need to be replaced and upgraded and out to 2035, 2040. That's the big picture. So it'll be early discussions, and then beyond that there could be new partner nations who join. So there's 5 at the moment, and as I understand it, then there's an MOU to be signed in Q1 or Q2 of 2022, and potentially there'll be an additional 2 other NATO members who can join. But again, big picture, anyone from NATO can join at any time. Just the those who have joined up at the moment have a veto power to rule out if they so wish, but I don't think anyone's really talking in those terms. It's just a technicality, really, worth talking about. But the US have observer status at the moment, so there's been a communications line opened between the 5 partner nations and FEL representatives. I think actually that would surprise some people, because clearly the European manufacturers would want one of their designs to meet the capability, whereas of course the US would obviously compete against that potentially. And with the FEL solution being FEL solutions being so far advanced, it's pretty much the elephant in the room that the European manufacturers haven't come up with anything as good as that at this stage. So not that it's in any way a foregone conclusion, but you would have to say, if you were just going by capability, there would be a strong possibility that an FEL aircraft, something like the V280, the tilt rotor, or the SB1 the coaxial design would certainly be of interest and really push for this one.
Okay, thank you. Anyone wants to add anything on the news from the air desk? Trevor?
I was chatting to a former Puma pilot yesterday who said, the airframe's pretty good, but he was saying that the Puma has still got a heck of a lift capability, which he was a little bit concerned about the replacement aircraft matching. Tim, is that true? Can a Puma carry more than the 2 bids in at the moment?
That's a very good question. I'd have to look up the tech specs for that one, Trevor. But I think beyond that, the Puma doesn't have an EOIR capability. So that'll be one thing that we probably, if the role for the aircraft is going to change in the next, say, 10 to 15 years, potentially an EOIR capability will be critical. And certainly FLIR have been in talks with the competitors, the airframers that I've just mentioned, not so much to offer a solution, but they've said to offer support in terms of saying to the airframers, what would you need? That might include convincing the MOD to have an EOIR capability and actually just come out and say it. So, whether that has already been discussed and the requirements are written, we're just waiting for them to be announced.
I think Harry wants to add something to that.
Yeah, it's interesting with the UK's helicopter requirement for new medium helicopter and the timeline for future vertical lift. The UK not long ago signed an agreement with the US Army that included cooperation on future vertical lift. So is it possible that these helicopters could only be in service for kind of 10 or so years and then we'll move on to the new thing?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely the logical idea here. It's not particularly something that industry will want to talk about. Again, it comes back to this whole idea that the US are so far ahead when it comes to vertical lift capabilities and designs, and you look at something like Airbus's Racer, that was excluded from future vertical lift at a very early stage. Again, Airbus don't particularly like that to be out in the open, but they did compete for FAL and they were cut out of it. And so, it really will be certainly an interesting one to see what genuine consideration is given to US aircraft for new medium helicopters, particularly because you have the national prosperity agenda that the UK are talking about at the moment.
Okay, thank you, Tim, for these highlights from the air desk, and thank you, Trevor and Harry, for your comments as well. Sam, you're quiet, so let's come to
quiet.
you. So
I don't want to ruffle any feathers, I'm not a regular on this show.
So this year it seems to be like a big focus on digital technologies, automation, autonomy, and there are a lot of unmanned ground vehicles exhibited on the show floor. And there is also a number of light manned armored utility vehicles on display. So any headlines from any of these companies exhibiting any of these platforms?
Well, I think you make a really great point in that there is such a massive focus on digital in the land domain at the moment. I've been walking around the stands and you're getting a couple of buzzwords thrown at you left, right, and center. It's digital, artificial intelligence, automation. And this isn't only coming from industry, it's also coming from government. I've attended a couple of keynotes from the Deputy Chief of Staff of the United States Army, but also the Chief of Staff of the British Army. And they're really focusing on digitalizing the British Armed Forces, the armored vehicles. And the impetus from this is basically the renewed focus on great power competition. On the 20th anniversary of 9/11, they've been talking about how they've wasted 20 years not being able to retool their forces, how they're unprepared, and how the way forward is really networking everything.
So any particular capability that caught your eye of what it could be part of this retooling strategy?
Well, the big one is unmanned ground vehicles, and the focus on this is trying to create a dispersed force that can then join back up at the right moment. And you've had a couple of companies. The big one is Kinetic and DSEL, who've developed a prototype for an unmanned ground vehicle, which is wheeled. And you've also got other companies like Aardvark, who they haven't developed a military unmanned ground vehicle, but they've developed one for logistics, for humanitarian purposes, for firefighting, and they're all meant to be joined up by AI algorithms and data systems, and it's still a bit nebulous on how it's all going to work, but there's certainly a lot of faith that the technology will work.
Well, they've got their own version of how it is going to work. We actually spoke to them, and there is a video up on our website about that if you are interested in learning more about it. And you also wrote a story about optical size, AI, VR powered. What is that?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically going back to this whole notion of augmented reality, of AI, and two companies in particular. So Raytheon, who developed an LCAN integrated sight for assault rifles, and Elbit Systems, who developed the RCAS system. And this is basically, the philosophy behind it is that every single service, whether it's the Navy, whether it's the Air Force, have digitalized their forces with nippy computers. And they're saying the infantryman, dismounted infantry, is the last to get digitalized. So they're introducing a bunch of integrated sights that will provide real-time information for soldiers peering down the scopes, and it can calculate ballistics, it can provide GPS navigation, it can provide information on how low your ammo is. So it's really trying to provide more situational awareness for dismounted infantry.
Okay, and anything else? Any other headlines?
I think maybe not a headline, but maybe a general observation is that there's sometimes I get this sense of collective amnesia in the land forces from both the United States and the UK, because they've been talking a lot about how the last 20 years have almost been wasted and that they haven't had enough time to focus on great power competition because they've been so bogged down in wars in the Middle East, in Afghanistan, and Iraq. But it's kind of conveniently forgets that they've spent billions and billions and billions of dollars on network platforms, whether it's the Future Combat System, whether it's the F-35, whether it's the Zumwalt class destroyers. So I don't know if they're forgetting those lessons, and a lot of that technology wasn't mature at the time, and that's why they kind of crashed and burned. So I haven't really seen whether the technology is mature enough to deliver on these new operational concepts that they're throwing around left, right, and center.
But is there anything that you would have expected to see that you didn't see this year? Did you have any expectations that weren't met?
I think I wanted to see a bit more explanation of how all this data fusion is going to work. And I think that a lot of them are putting a lot of faith into this. There's a lot of techno-optimism going around, but they're not exactly sure yet. And a lot of the platforms we've seen on display are just demonstrators. They don't actually have... they're not actually field ready to go straight in. So there's still a bit of work to be done before these technologies will be mature enough and can deliver on what all the nice press releases are saying they can do.
Okay, thank you, Sam. Harry, let's come to you. Let's go to the naval desk. Big story that broke yesterday night on the 16th.
Yeah, so the big news that's kind of on everyone's minds naval-wise today is the Australian, UK, US AUKUS strategic partnership deal, and the announcement that the UK and the US would be helping Australia build nuclear-powered submarines, and they're very keen to make clear that they're nuclear-powered and not nuclear-armed. It wasn't DSEI news, but it's kind of superseded anything that was announced just by the pure scale of it. So I was on the show floor yesterday when news started to emerge, and kind of texted a few contacts and was told that something would be announced, but no details would be confirmed. So the scale of there's no financials announced yet, but the scale of what will emerge is going to be huge on a financial basis, and I'm expecting to hear more from government and industry as the rest of the show goes on.
Okay.
So the contract with Naval Group is dead though, right?
Yeah, so the Australian government has confirmed that their contract with Naval Group has been terminated. So that was the $90 billion contract for 12 Barracuda-class submarines. In France, they are nuclear-powered, but Australia specifically kind of went out of its way to get conventionally powered. So the program's been going on for 5 years, and there's been a lot of work to go into setting up the industrial base, preparing the country to build these submarines, and obviously convert what is a nuclear design to a diesel-powered design. And now it's kind of been pulled out from under Naval Group. So they released a statement this morning, and obviously, as you can imagine, aren't happy.
Do we know what went wrong then from Naval Group's side?
They haven't said. Obviously, there's been problems with the program. So there's been huge arguments about industrial arrangements, how much of the program will be built by Australian industry or have Australian input. Obviously, Naval Group is a big exporter, but they tend to build most of their ships in France and kind of sell them on kind of straight off the production line, as they've done with some past deals for things like Frem, the frigate. So there's no kind of confirmation, but I would imagine it's stemming from just the long beleaguered nature of the program, in that constantly over the past 5 years there's been kind of problem after problem, and it's kind of just seems to have come to a head. And it's interesting, the capability difference. So there was a kind of some information doing the rounds yesterday about the amount of time a submarine can spend on station in the Indo-Pacific on average. And so I think I think for a conventional submarine, they usually stay on station in the Pacific for around 11 days. But a nuclear submarine can stay for kind of roughly 77 days. So it's a huge capability difference between diesel and nuclear power.
And do you have any ideas about the geopolitical shift that's the impetus behind this?
Well, naturally, the driving force behind all of this is China. And even if Biden won't say China in his speech and he'll just talk about challenges in the Indo-Pacific, it's clear that the aim of this UK, Australia, US partnership is countering China and asserting presence in the region. And it's a trend we're hearing from everyone. The UK is tilting to the Indo-Pacific. The Indo-Pacific is the US primary theatre of operations now, so that's what they call it. And Australia, naturally, they've seen countries around them have their territorial waters encroached upon and their authority challenged. So this is clearly kind of the Anglosphere trying to stamp its presence in the region.
Thank you, Harry. So obviously this is like the major story from this week, but there were other things that I also wanted to ask you. We're running out of time, but just briefly, there is one of your stories that talks about Navy pods, the Royal Navy pushing for podular capabilities. So what on earth is that?
Yeah, so we've had all the kind of buzzword soup, and we've got thrown podular into the mix as well, which is a mix of pod and modular. But I think pod is self-explanatory anyway, so not sure where podular came from, but I kind of quite like it. Essentially, the idea is that they want to separate capability from platform, and the Royal Navy has recognised that it just, on the budget it has, it can't afford a fleet of exclusively high-end ships. It can't do it. And so they want simpler ships that are kind of base platforms, and capability can be taken on and off, basically in a shipping container is the idea.
Okay. And they are also exhibiting mine hunting capabilities. Is that correct?
That's a requirement for the Royal Navy that they're exploring. And so next month there's something called WiseX, which is part of Project Wilton, the autonomous mine hunting work. And they basically invited lots of industry up to Scotland to do some dummy mine clearance work and detect mines using autonomous capabilities. So one of the stories from the show is that Raytheon and Atlas Electronic have partnered to kind of demonstrate a capability using the AQS-20C sonar with the 11-meter RSIMS USV.
Yeah.
And so they're going to demonstrate that to the Navy. The idea is these companies will go along, help the Navy define its requirements ahead of a competitive phase that will come at some point in the future.
Okay. I just wanted to mention on the naval side that there is also Saab this year exhibiting their combat boat CB90NG. It was my first trip on a combat boat ever. I was really excited. I got to go there yesterday. I filmed a video of it, and you can find it on our website. So it's the first time the Saab has brought the boat outside Sweden. They have highlighted that this is a new craft that builds on previous generations of more than 250 boats, and it features track fire, RWS integration for force multiplication through reliability, hit performance, and adaptable flexibility. And just before we wrap up the naval domain, Harry, I'm going to ask you the same question I asked Sam earlier. Is there anything that you would have expected to see that you didn't see?
Potentially, it would have been nice to hear from the Royal Navy about what. So they've announced a kind of host of new platforms, multi-role support ships, the Type 32, all in the integrated review, and we're kind of months down the line and still have no idea what either of them are. So it would have been nice to hear about what they want the Type 32 to be, or at least see some requirements. Industry has a rough idea, but again, this would have been a good opportunity to kind of get on stage and say, we're going to be acquiring a frigate in about 8 years. This is what it's going to look like.
Thank you, Harry. So final thoughts, Tim?
Well, I just wanted to jump in on, what you asked Harry there about, was there anything on the equivalent question, I guess?
Yeah.
Was there anything on the other side that was surprising? There was a little model of Excalibur, which is the Tempest flight test aircraft. So that's being designed by 2XL Aviation. And it's the first time it's
you were visiting the Sun this morning, yeah.
Yeah, so it's the first time it's been on show. So effectively, 2XL will test the 757 with a number of sensors and new combat air technologies to inform the core platform of Tempest, which is still to be built. So that's a really, really interesting one in terms of where the UK is going, or that multinational program is going, sixth generation program, as we know. But also it moves on then the test bed itself from a feasibility phase to design and build activities. So that'll all be based at Hampshire.
Okay, so from an airside point of view, you happy with the announcements made, with the capabilities that you have seen, or even for you there is something that is missing?
Yeah, well, there is always that kind of, after a show finishes, you kind of think you were expecting a little bit more in terms of big reveals.
What's more for you then?
Well, in particular, there wasn't actually any, on the air side, new aircraft. For example, there was different small models I've mentioned. Excalibur hadn't been shown before, but actually the aircraft itself was bought by 2XL in February 2020. It's not here.
Yeah.
There's a little scale model outside, so it would have been nice to see the real deal. But that's the type of thing I'm talking about.
Okay, thank you, Tim. Trevor, your final thoughts?
I'd just like to pick up on a couple of things that Harry mentioned and also Sam. And Sam was talking about the digitisation of the military, the ground forces and whatever. And that mirrors really what I was saying about training, the digitalisation of it all. And it makes it a lot easier when you've got a digital platform and a digital training system to integrate the two at an earlier stage. So training's provided before these vehicles come into service. And Harry made an interesting point about he was expecting to hear a little bit more about the from the Royal Navy about their future requirements. I think that could be a constructive criticism offered to the UK Ministry of Defence as a whole, that I think they need to be a little bit more open in the way that they put their requirements out to industry, how they're discussed, not only for industry to contribute, but also academia, and think tanks and, dare I say it, the press, because we've been around a long time and we've seen lots of these programmes come and go over the years. So that would be a call to the Ministry of Defence to get the message out earlier.
It's interesting you should say that, because it was one thing that was pleased to hear from the Second Sea Lord's keynote on Wednesday, was that he specifically said, kind of at the end, he said, if we've got this wrong, we want you to tell us. So at least from that one senior, Vice Admiral Nick Hine, there seems to be an appetite from the MOD to listen to more than just the traditional kind of 5 or 6 primes that do business with them, and be told that maybe what they're looking at isn't the right idea.
And Trevor, I know that every week every time that you come on the podcast, you got a great quote. You have one this week for us as well.
I think you've just caught me on the hop there, Naomi, but I will come up with one, and that's the Shepherd's approach to this great show that we've just been at now, and that is Vini, Vidi, Vici. We came, we saw, we conquered.
Tell us, were you quoting?
Julius Caesar, that marvellous Italian fellow.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for these headlines from the show floor of the Excel Centre in London this week. And just a reminder to our listeners that you can read these copies and much more on our website. And the DSEI dedicated microsite is accessible to all for free until the 28th of September. So that's all from me and the team today. We will be back after a short break, this time with Tim Martin in conversation with Mark Goldsack, Director of UK Defence and Security Exports. Stay with us.
Artificial intelligence is rapidly changing the world in which we live. Evidence of artificial intelligence is all around us and will have profound implications on everyday life in the decades to come. In the military world, artificial intelligence technologies are having a similarly massive effect and are beginning to change the face of modern warfare. Artificial intelligence and machine learning applications promise to enhance productivity, reduce user workload, and operate more quickly than humans. But this doesn't come without its challenges. How easy is it for an adversary to fool artificial intelligence systems? How well do AI systems cope with a chaotic and ever-changing conflict? And how will the human in the loop oversee AI systems on a battlefield swarming with autonomous assets? The Artificial Intelligence on the Battlefield podcast dives into these issues and more. How will artificial intelligence reshape the future of warfare? Created by Shephard Studio, in partnership with our sponsor Sistel, the Artificial Intelligence on the Battlefield podcast on shepherdmedia.com/news, or wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Shephard's editor, Tim Martin. I'm delighted to say I'm joined by Mark Goldsack, Director of UK Defence and Security Exports. Mark, it's brilliant to have you with us on the podcast, and we're meeting at DSEI, which is, of course, a big bonus for us. First time being in meetings in person, let's say, for a long, long time.
Yeah, thank you. And really good to see you, Tim. Really good to be able to welcome you here to this year's edition of DSEI, the Defence and Security Exhibition International. I think, like a lot of people, we've weathered the pandemic, but I think you can see from the looks on people's faces here just how much everybody recognises the importance of that face-to-face and personal engagement, particularly given that the topics and the issues that we're discussing here are actually really serious ones. They're about defence and security, it's about international relationships, it's about the military-to-military relationships we've got around the globe, and it's about the series of very close partnerships and alliances that sit there. And the relief of being able to do that face-to-face and not on virtual means, I think, is apparent everywhere. So I'm delighted that the event has managed to take off. I'm delighted that we've got a set of protocols that have allowed us to manage the risk from COVID here effectively. And you can see from everybody's comments, everybody's faces, that we're up for a really rich engagement this week.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and let's get straight into it then. What is the main focus then for DSE this week?
Well, our role as an organisation has always been to make sure that we've got the smoothest possible relationship with our international partners. And of course, this year sees us looking not only into the aftermath of the pandemic, but into an increasingly unstable world. And against that backdrop, looking as to how we're going to play our part with our colleagues across government, across the services, across the various ministries, in implementing both the integrated review and the Defence and Security Industrial Strategy that were published earlier this year. These documents, if you like, provide us with the guiding star, the reference point, by which we're going to develop, enhance, deepen the cooperation we've got globally, and make sure that in an increasingly unstable world, what we're providing to ourselves through our own sovereign industrial base and what that industrial base does with our allies and friends is coherent and actually provides us the sort of security we want looking forward.
Okay, and in terms of the integrated review, it's some months after it was released. How is it supporting defence exports? What is notable in there for industry?
Well, I think at the heart of this, there's a recognition now that if you want a vibrant industrial base to supply your own sovereign capability, we have to recognise it needs a bigger customer base than one particular defence establishment. So the trick here is to come up with, if you like, common user groups for the capabilities, the interests, the uses that we want from that industrial base. Now, for us, the Defence and Security Industrial Strategy brings that element of the IR alive. It gives us, if you like, a set of guidelines on which sectors we need to prioritise, which capabilities we're particularly looking to partner with people overseas, and therefore it gives us a really coherent framework going forward to create the sort of sustainable relationships we need to make this work. And of course, we're not talking about flash in a pan issues here. The sorts of capabilities, the sort of cooperation we're talking about take years to generate, and they're sustained for years, and then they'll take years to bring out a service and refresh. So this is about long-term relationships, but trying to use them in a way that actually gives us all a cutting-edge capability on a constant basis. And that's not a trivial task. And at least now we've got a really coherent set of refreshed policies coming out of the pandemic to work with. And as we see this increasing relaxation of travel restrictions, as we return back to a degree of face-to-face engagement with people, what I hope we're going to see is a deepening of the discussions we've been able to maintain throughout the pandemic to really get at some of those core issues of cooperation. And for us in the UK, I think we've stood in a uniquely strong point. We've got a set of industries and a set of technologies that are genuinely cutting edge. And of course, that makes my job an awful lot easier to have something that is valued across the global user community. But most importantly from that is, what do we then do with that stuff? How do we actually bring that, if you like, into operation with each other? And for us, a lot of that hinges on the government-to-government relationships we've got, the service-to-service relationships, the political context of what we're doing. And we have got some really good friends and allies around the world. And I'm really looking forward to the fact that what DSIS has allowed us to do is to focus that. We've got a clear idea now of what we're trying to achieve with each of our partners. Our companies have got a clear idea of how they're going to work within that framework. And for all of us, the common threat that we face and the instability that we're looking at, it puts us in a much stronger position in terms of developing the sort of win-win partnership that we're talking about, because our industry at the end of the day is privately owned. It's not a state process. And that gives us the ability to work with IP, the ability to create genuine shared IP and joint ventures going forward that most other industrial constructs don't. And I think that's what makes our companies and makes us as a government actually quite attractive as a partner going forward, because we've got a willingness, an appetite and a competency in working internationally with quite complex setups.
And just in reference to DSIS, which for those outside the UK may not be so familiar, just give us a real insight into what it means for export prospects and so forth, and perhaps how it differs with similar documents produced in years gone by.
So, as a strategy, what it gives us is a framework by which we can harness the whole of government and the whole of the economy in one direction. And I think the challenge we've always had when you've got an element of freedom across the system, is making sure that everybody pulls in the right direction at the right time. To do that, you need a binding idea, and the strategy does that for us. It gives us that view from a defence industrial and a security industrial point of view. It gives us a real framework against which we can look at this. Now, as we go forward, the areas that have been identified in it and the sort of programmes, projects, capabilities that we're looking at to understand and to work with means that we've actually got focus. And focus allows us a degree of consistency, and consistency allows us confidence in what we invest in terms of government money and what industry invests in terms of its own private money, in developing these really quite challenging developmental targets that lie within it. And because we've built into it from the beginning the idea that this isn't just about domestic consumption, it's about making sure that we're servicing the whole of our alliance's needs, we've actually got a really rich basis from which to deliver an export cooperation programme. And that export traditionally has been talked about in transactional terms as items or materiel. But I think these days it reflects a much broader set of capabilities. We're talking about services as much as we're talking about hard materiel. And we're talking about sustained effort. We're not just talking about a point of sale activity. This is about the partnership that comes with it, the training, the long-term developmental, cyclical developmental piece that goes with it, and recognising that in terms of doctrine and usage and actual operational understanding of how we develop these capabilities and use them, we're actually in a position to share that with our friends and partners. So you're looking at a whole package there, which is now enabled by that policy structure, which is a really, really welcome advance for everybody because it drives coherence into things. And as you all well know, as being a long-term commentator of this stuff, coherence is the golden goal that we're all aiming for. The more coherent and interoperable we are, the more effective we are together as a group.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and big picture, I mean, what in terms of the amount of money spent on UK exports from the defence chain? I mean,
right, so let me just give you a sense of scale here, because we are a significant part of the economy. Inevitably, and this mirrors, if you like, the figures that exist in the civil sector, aerospace accounts for about 70% of the value, and that's not surprising. Clearly, going forward, the aerospace industry is reconfiguring in the aftermath of the pandemic. That's no different for the military side of it. And we're going to have to make sure that we continue to not only provide the right sort of technological answers to the challenges people are trying to deal with there, but also provide the sort of sustained effort that will continue to give us the sort of sovereign technology pool to draw from that we've counted on in the past. So that inevitably attracts an awful lot of our effort. But that in and of itself isn't everything. We're also very conscious of things like the National Shipbuilding Strategy, which is incredibly important to our maritime capability base. And whilst we've all been recognised the quality that's come out in terms of the aircraft carriers, Type 26, Type 31, the trick we've got to carry through with that is making sure that we leverage that for the benefit of the wider economy as well. So I think the fact that we're now recognising this isn't about operating in stovepipes, it's how we run the industrial sectors intelligently, where we bridge across where the capability is shared, where the technology is shared, where we create that cycle of positive investment into our manufacturing capability, where we look at how that plays into things like the levelling up agenda and our relationship with the devolved administrations. This is an incredibly powerful industrial offering. And the great news for the defence and security sectors is that whilst quite often people are, sort of distracted, if you like, by the eye-catching primes, there's actually a really substantive SME base that sits beneath that. And that's where a lot of the innovation really is driven from. And those SMEs are as vibrant and as active as they've ever been. And they are, of course, spread across the country, which again leads us into this much broader set of efforts that are being done by the Department for International Trade to make sure that we leverage the whole national effort into our Global Britain proposition. And I think you'll see a lot of those traditional boundaries between sectors erode as people start to understand that actually if you're laying a green agenda across everything, the traditional sectoral divisions we might have placed on things become less important than the actual technology we're seeking to exploit for the benefit of all. So there's a broad-based economic proposition there that underpins the fundamental national security element of what the Defence and Security Industrial Strategy set out to do. What does that mean for us overall? Actually, it means we're in for a pretty exciting ride, I think, over the next couple of years. We've got an industry that's confident. We've got a set of technologies that are resurgent. We've got an active and very capable Ministry of Defence that is delivering a broad, full-spectrum defence force. And that's a great platform from which, for people like me, to be able to create the relationships we want with our international partners and allies.
Okay, and just looking into the future then, I suppose now that COVID's over, there may be stronger opportunities in terms of defence exports. I mean, even despite the fact that during COVID, there did seem to be a healthy number of procurements internationally going ahead, and competition didn't really seem to stay static. But I guess now that we're 18 months down the line, do you expect there to be greater competition on the export market and a higher frequency of contracts to be announced and so forth, and the tenders will return at the pace they were pre-COVID?
You make a very valid point. I mean, we never stood still. The economies don't stand still. I mean, it's been disrupted, yes, by COVID, but has it stood still? No. I think for us as a sector, what's been interesting is that the strategic nature of these sectors means that, as you say, there's been a constant feed of ongoing procurement programs that everybody's been working on. But I do see a much more competitive world as we come out the far side of this pandemic. Inevitably, funding lines are going to switch, funding lines will be adjusted, priorities for spending are going to change against the face of the pandemic. And we're all going to have to work with that and live with it and work out how we continue to offer what we're doing, which is that offer of partnership, of a proper leading edge capability as we go forward. And that is a competitive business. We're not afraid of that competition because we're very confident in the quality of the technology that we're offering, the quality of the cooperation that our Ministry of Defence offers around it, and the actual quality of supervision that Her Majesty's Government gives to these things in the round. So I think we've got a really sound and competitive offer to go into a very competitive environment. Of course, we're going to have to test that over the next year, but the coherence which the Defence and Security Industrial Strategy gives us actually makes us even more powerful, because as we join up, as we maintain that consistency of approach, and as everybody across this really quite broad-ranging endeavour, across different government departments, across different parts of the industry, working closely with international partners, what that coherence that brings actually makes us even more competitive. So I'm confident looking at this. We've got the tools that we need to do it. I'm confident that we've got the products, the services, the capabilities to offer into that process. And I'm confident that as a national endeavour, this is something that will feed back to what the integrated review and the Defence and Security Industrial Strategy was seeking to do, which is to provide us with a secure, sovereign defence and security industrial base from which we can continue to serve both ourselves and our partners and allies across the globe.
Okay, and just maybe a final word then on industry. If, say, for example, someone was to come to you and say, what is the ideal method to maximise our prospects of gaining export contracts, give us an example of what the types of things you would be saying to them.
So we offer a wide range of support to companies. And of course, the support and assistance that companies need to operate overseas varies according to market and activity. But the sorts of issues that we're talking about is, first of all, that confidence to move into an overseas market. So it's understanding that market, understanding what the access issues are, what the barrier issues might be. And we have a very large global team based in every embassy around the globe that's there to do that, not just for the defence and security sectors, but for broader economic sectors as well. And so our understanding of the global economy is probably unparalleled as an organisation. And so we can really help folks understand the environment into which they want to export. Alongside that, of course, we're part of a trade ministry that's in the process of renegotiating a lot of our trade arrangements around the place. So we're very aware of where the trading climate sits in each of these critical markets, and therefore we're able to advise people on how to modify, tune their offers so they absolutely hit the spot as they go in. So that's one element of it. I think the other element of it is that there's always a set of branding issues, shall I call them, where actually the quality that people have come to expect from British-produced goods, British-produced services, the kite mark that comes with, is really important in the global marketplace. We are known for that quality, and whilst we're not necessarily always the cheapest, the quality nobody argues with. So that element of how we work as a coherent group across the industry really does matter, and you see that today. You can see that we're operating in a much more coherent group as a sector than we've ever done before. And I'm really looking forward to seeing that play out as travel restrictions relax and our companies are able to access on a much freer basis through travel the markets they're trying to get into. And I think the final point of it is also recognising that no one entity, whether it be a company, a government ministry, controls everything in this space. This is actually about having a team approach. And industry is recognising that actually the most powerful offerings that we can give our international partners are teamed approaches. And when people look at what we've done on things like the Carrier Alliance that built the Queen Elizabeth and the Prince of Wales, people are saying that we're at the cutting edge of that as well. So some of that mechanism by which our industrial partners work together and work with international industrial partners is something that people are keen to see as we go forward. And you'll have seen globally the amount of MOUs and agreements being signed by our key British companies with their partners in a lot of these foreign overseas economies are underpinning a lot of that trade as it comes to life. So we're seeing what I would hope we would see as we come out of this pandemic, which is a very deliberate effort to make sure that we come together and provide that strong, supported, but very competitive offer to people that makes us irresistible to work with. And at the end of the day, with a bit of British charm, a bit of British quality, why wouldn't you want to work with us? Yeah, we've got a great offer out there, and as you can see from the people that we've got here today and during the week, there's no shortage of foreign partners who want to come here and work with us.
Okay, and just to round up then, in terms of export licenses being complicated by Brexit and so forth, is that still a live issue?
Licensing will always be a live issue. And one of the things I'm really proud to be able to say is just how strong our licensing system is. And I think people often forget, this is one of the reasons why the British kite mark is worth so much, is because our licensing system is the tightest in the world. And we shouldn't be afraid of that. That means that what we do is properly scrutinised, and we can be really proud of what we're doing under that system. So, yes, it will always cause a bit of friction and system around the place. Any licensing system does. Should we be concerned about it? Not particularly. Because I think we can be proud of the principles that it's applying. Can we do it better? We will always endeavour to do it better. And I know my colleagues work incredibly hard in that space to make sure that what they provide to people is the most effective licensing system that they can. So we remain open for business. We're looking actively to prosecute business overseas. We're looking to make sure that licensing system that's being applied is applied absolutely vigorously across the system. Because we actually think that the partners and allies we're working with and what we're working on are all really, really good news for everybody concerned in that package.
Mark, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. Thanks so much. And perhaps in 6 months or 7 months, we can catch up again and revisit some of these issues. Thanks again.
Cheers. Thank you.
For over 40 years, Shephard has led the defence and aerospace sector with magazines, equipment handbooks, and cutting-edge news stories. Shephard now champions the best business information and marketing solutions across digital, so your business can have the decisive edge in everything you do. Make your team the competitive advantage. Partner with Shephard today. Get in touch with one of our customer experts to discuss your needs at shephardmedia.com.
So welcome to this week's edition of Industry Voice. This is a part of the podcast where we have a chance to speak to our sponsor, which this week is FNSS. I'm sitting down with Douglas Jackson, who's the Assistant General Manager at FNSS. Douglas, so in this case, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you for having me back.
So So last time we spoke, it was during IDF Week, which is the defence exhibition in Istanbul, and you ran us through your developments across the sort of 8x8 and 6x6 armoured vehicle range. And this time we're going to talk about combat engineering vehicles, obviously a pretty key part of land warfare and manoeuvre warfare and everything else. What can you tell us about FNSS's work in this area?
Okay, so it's interesting if you look at the history of FNSS. Last time we were talking about the 8x8s and the 6x6s, and actually the initial seeds of that family of vehicle, the pass-wheeled family of vehicles, came from the work that we did on the 8x8 chassis. And that chassis was the basis of the bridging vehicle, the wet-wide gap crossing vehicle that we call Otter here in Turkey. And that chassis was the first 8x8 chassis that we put out into the field. It came before the pass family of vehicles. So the two subjects are interlinked. And the transition of FNSS as a defence company from manufacturing product under license from the US in the 90s and early 2000s into the design, development and indigenous manufacture here in Turkey was through the two engineering vehicles that we have in our portfolio. The Amphibious Armoured Combat Earth Mover, or ACE, and the AAAB vehicle that we call the Otter. They were the first two indigenous vehicles that were delivered from FNSS in the early 2000s, 2010 kind of timeframe.
Excellent. Yeah, it's good to know that heritage. So let's just sort of dive in to more detail on both those vehicles. I guess you mentioned the Amphibious Armoured Combat Earth Mover, which is, I guess, designed for the preparation of riverbanks during river crossing missions. Also, I guess the vehicle's amphibious. How important is that amphibious capability?
It's actually very important. The concept for this vehicle was to work in conjunction with the AAAB bridging vehicle, which is obviously highly amphibious. So having an earth-moving vehicle for preparation of riverbanks, entry-exit points for that vehicle where needed, because that vehicle, the AAAB in itself, is highly mobile, and being able to go where the AAAB goes is very important. So the amphibious capability of the ACE vehicle is extremely important. It does also make it versatile when it's not working in conjunction with the AAAB. So this vehicle was originally delivered to the Turkish land forces at the same time as the AAAB, but we see when the TLF use it in operations, as well as being used together with the bridging vehicle, it gets used on its own because of its capabilities. It's quite a compact vehicle, has a crew of two, sat within a protected crew compartment at the back left of the vehicle, and kind of different to other earth-moving vehicles and things that you see in the defence market. Its front excavator blade, it is physically attached to the vehicle. It's not on its own set of hydraulics, so it makes it a very tough, highly capable machine for moving things, digging trenches, that kind of stuff.
And then on the other vehicle we've been talking about is the Otter, which is the rapid deployable amphibious wet gap crossing system. Me being a layman, trying to describe how it works, the vehicles are essentially coupled together and then can offer either a ferry service to take heavy vehicles across, a river, or in fact can couple enough of them together and you create a bridging system. Is that a fair summary of how things work?
Yes, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, this was the first vehicle that we delivered based on our 8x8 chassis. And if you imagine an 8x8 chassis with two pontoons on the roof that hydraulically deploy to the sides and fold down, which you can do from within the vehicle, you don't have to exit the vehicle to do that movement. That turns it into a floating pontoon, in effect, the whole vehicle. So once those pontoons are deployed from the roof to the sides, it can then drive itself into the water and float. The vehicle is self-contained, so every AAAB unit has a winch and 4 ramps on the vehicle. So once the pontoons are deployed, the winch can deploy the ramps, which means it can link either to another AAAB unit or to land. And there's 2 configurations in which it operates. It can operate as a ferry, as you mentioned, either on its own, in a pair, or 3 linked together. And that can transport vehicles in ferry mode across rivers and lakes. And in the other mode, the units link themselves together by use of these ramps that I described earlier. And they basically make a bridge to cross the river, the lake, whatever body of water you're trying to cross. And we have kind of a standard thing where we can cross 100, 150 metre gaps, and that's what the Turkish Land Forces train to cross those kind of gaps in quite high speeds as well. I think you can build a bridge system to cross a 100-metre gap in around 10 minutes, which is pretty impressive.
Yeah, that's sort of raised my eyebrows. That's sort of surprising. If we were to sort of, cast our eye to the future, what are you guys working on in terms of the art of the possible when it comes to these types of combat engineering vehicles?
So with the earth-moving vehicle ACE, we actually have an export contract at the moment that we're working on. Pretty similar configuration to what we delivered to TLF just over 10 years ago. And those vehicles will be delivered to the Philippines in the next couple of years. So that product continues to interest customers around the world. In terms of technical developments, we're in quite a good position on the bridging vehicle, the AAAB. It was designed about 12 years ago, where luckily we had all modern CAD systems and systems design thinking here at FNSS. So we have the vehicle in our design systems, which allows us to take information from TLF when they're using the vehicle. And I'll mention at this point, we have support contracts. So we support TLF in maintaining these vehicles and keeping them in operational state, which is excellent for an OEM because you get feedback from the field about how the users use the vehicle, how it's performing, if there are any maintainability issues, and we can feed that back into our designers. So when we're looking at what we should be doing for potential future customers, we can build those into our thinking. So specifically, if we look at where we think this may be usable in the future, specifically Project Triton in the UK, they're looking at procuring systems for wet wide gap crossing, and the Germans similarly. We'll be looking at things like the GVA, the generic vehicle architecture thing that I know the UK put emphasis on. And we have an open architecture on the vehicle that we believe is easily adaptable to those kind of requirements that come from GVA. And kind of linking it back to what we were showing at IDEF a couple of weeks ago. At IDEF, we showed our Shadow Rider autonomous vehicle, and we're looking at ways that we can utilize maybe not full autonomy, but those kind of systems on how the bridge system gets deployed. So we can introduce systems on the platform that reduces the workload on the crew on the vehicle, and the vehicle does more by itself rather than requiring crew intervention. I think that's one of the key areas that we'll be looking at in the future, deploying those technologies onto the bridge system.
Excellent. So anybody that's fans of military bridging systems, and I know that there's a surprising number out there amongst our listenership, I would encourage you to go to the FNSS website, look up these vehicles. Certainly the bridge crossing capability is very impressive. Yeah, 10 minutes to get across a 100-metre gap is pretty remarkable. I guess we're running out of time, Douglas, but just leave me to say thanks very much for joining us on the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me. Have a good day.
You've been listening to another episode of the Weekly Defence Podcast. As always, a big thanks to everyone who took the time of being with us today. For our listeners, if you enjoyed the show, make sure you like and subscribe. Leave a review on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts from. Until next week, thanks for listening.